Today, my interview guest is Mason Harris. You're going to love this show. Mason calls himself the Chutzpah guy. Chutzpah, Chutzpah. It's key to making decisions. It's key to getting out there and making things happen. The C stands for Carpe Diem, and I think that's what this is all about. Mason's going to guide us through his thoughts on this. It's a longer interview than normal because I wanted to really give Mason time to think and talk about the things that really mean something to him in this chutzpah conversation. You'll understand it. It's got some selling connotations in terms of how you do things with chutzpah, but actually to me it's about life. It's about building things. It's about getting out there and making a difference. And listen as I talk to him and ask the final question, which is what would he do differently if he had a choice in the future? So actually listen carefully, enjoy the show, and as always, feel free to come back to me with questions and answers that you think of as you go through this. I can't hold you to account, I always say that, but I can be here as your coach if you need to. But either way, enjoy the show, take lots of notes, learn from it, and pass it on to those who need it as well. Thanks very much. Here's Mason Harris. Welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rhodes, your host, and today I'm joined by Mason Harris. I first met Mason in Dallas in April 2022 when we were both attending the Scaling Up conference where Vern Harnish was speaking, and Mason was on stage speaking as one of the guests at the event. I saw what he had to say, I heard what he had to say, and I saw the reaction the audience had, and I thought, we've got to get this guy on the podcast at some stage. So Mason has given up his time to be with us today for 45 minutes to talk about what chutzpah really means. So Mason, the chutzpah guy, welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Well, I thank you, one, for your kind words about my presentation, and two, especially for having me on your podcast. You have a global reach.
Yeah.
You have clients and followers all over the world. So chutzpah actually is a term that has meaning, sometimes with different words, all over the place. It's not limited, as people say, it's a Yiddish word. Yes, is it a Jewish thing? And my answer is no, it actually has meaning everywhere.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right, actually, isn't it? Because when you and I talked previously, I asked you how to pronounce it. And I'd heard you say it because obviously a lot of people see this word Chutzpah and think it's chutzpah or some other form of it. So actually this chutzpah is what you told me how to pronounce it. And I heard you on stage do it. So tell me a bit about why chutzpah and what does it mean to you and how did you create that chutzpah guy?
Sure, but well, first of all, I got to commend you. You're saying it like you're a native speaker. The guttural side is tremendous, and in English, the ch can also sound like a k, as in character. It can sound like a ch, as in chai tea.
Good point.
So it has a number of that, but the guttural sound is not natural to us as much. So the chutzpah is difficult. I've seen a lot of people just. Well, one, I've seen it spelled without the C as chutzpah.
Okay.
And I see even with the C, sometimes people pronounce it as chutzpah.
Yeah.
So sometimes I tell people, think of the C as well, you're international. You've been to New York. Think of it as a stop sign in New York. You can ignore it. It's a recommendation, but if you're in the mood, just go right through. That's what we New Yorkers do.
I love it. I love it. And this piece about New York, we'll come on to that in a minute because I want to ask you some questions about your experience in Queens and growing up. But tell me, how did you come up with this chutzpah, and what was it that inspired you to create the chutzpah guy? And obviously, we need to talk about your book as well, the Chutzpah Advantage, and what that means. So tell me a bit about the backstory behind this, because I think there's some fascinating pieces in there. I think listeners would love to hear.
Sure. There is, growing up, I learned as a youngster and then through school that certain people seem better at accomplishing things, getting more of what they wanted, being more persuasive in selling their ideas. And this could have been even in college in different committee meetings. Some people stood up and advocated for their ideas in a better way. And most of the time, people think in terms of, well, they were probably extroverts. And because they were extroverts, they were able to outspeak or talk louder than the next guy. Many of the introverts probably weren't saying anything anyway. And I accepted that initially, but then I realized that was wrong because over the course of time, I realized people who self-identify as introverts also have chutzpah. Frankly, a lot of leaders of major corporations come
Yeah.
from fields like accounting or finance, where you don't
Yeah.
think in terms of, oh, that's the brash salesperson who's the
Yeah.
extrovert. It's somebody who's more quiet, who's more introspective, but their chutzpah is equally as great and strong
Yeah.
as somebody who's extroverted. So for me, I realize that there's got to be more than extroversion, extroverted versus introverted, or
Yeah.
an ambivert if you're right in the middle, which is actually I've taken an assessment and that's where I fell into.
To pull it both
Which
together. That's interesting. Okay.
and actually I think most of us fall into that area because we have the ability to adapt. Some
Mm,
meetings we're fine sitting back. We're not the leaders, and the leader who's leading is doing a good enough job. We don't have uh,
yeah.
to come in and fill some shoes.
Yeah.
Other meetings, you can see this is floundering. We don't have a lot of time left, but I need to get something done. So I'm going to take a little bit more control. I'm going to try and steer the direction, get off this meaningless stuff, and let's accomplish what we're
Yeah.
here for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's do.
That's interesting. So that chutzpah thing was actually from an early age, you could see there was something else that people had that enabled them to step up and do things differently.
Yes.
So here's a question. A lot of people out there will be listening and hearing saying, well, what does chutzpah mean? Because we can all look in the dictionary, in the dictionary, and if I look at on my bookshelf here, I've got the Oxford English Dictionary over there, and I haven't done this, but if I was to look in there to find the definition, I'd find multiple definitions of what it means. So what does chutzpah mean to you? What's the phraseology you use?
Well, this is one of the situations where I have to turn it around and ask you. But I will say this, in my research, I found easily 40 definitions, 40 synonyms, that some were very close, some weren't.
Yeah.
Some talked about the negative aspects or the destructive side of chutzpah.
Okay.
Some spoke about the constructive side of chutzpah. And we'll have a chance to talk about that too.
That's
But
interesting.
what is chutzpah or chutzpah to you?
That's interesting. Good question. Love turning around actually. You'll do well as a coach in that case. So I think for me it's about determination. It's about I use the word grit, and you and I talked about I think grit is something that really comes in there. It's about perseverance, getting stuff done. It's about hard work
Yeah,
sometimes, but I think you can achieve things with less. I'm about to say less hard work by having more chutzpah. But I think it's about getting up and doing stuff, having
yeah.
having the ability to stand up and say, I'm going to go and do it, whatever. I was going to say something else there, but actually, having the balls to do something. That's what I meant.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's used a lot in describing chutzpah,
Yeah. Okay.
because it implies that, oh, I'm courageous enough or confident enough, I'm going to go against the grain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, that is absolutely a good word to use too. And when I realized in researching um, people's definitions that, well, if I take 40 plus of these synonyms and
Mm, of
descriptions and try and turn that into a book, nobody will remember a thing that I said,
course not.
and the lessons will be lost. So instead, I used the letters of the word chutzpah
Okay.
and looked at 8 key behaviors and characteristics
Yeah.
to make a model that's memorable. So somebody who's in a situation, in a meeting, or contemplating a job change, or moving to another city, or even whether or not to go on to college, which for some people is actually an act of chutzpah. If nobody in your family has any higher education, and you're the
Uh-huh.
first one to do that, and people are saying, "Why are you doing that? Come work with me in the mill or the retail store. You'll start making money." It takes chutzpah to say, no, I see a different future for myself,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
it means I'm postponing gratification,
Yeah.
money, income, and a lot more fun going out with my friends by going on and taking a hard course of study. I'm
Well,
going to do it.
that's
So
interesting. So
that
something
fits as
about
well.
yeah, and I love that going against the grain, coming up with an idea. So in some ways, if we think about the listen to this podcast, a lot of them are entrepreneurs, a lot of them are founders of organizations or leaders in organizations. They have to have done something different. They've had to go against the grain. And I wonder whether, if you think about entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs are those ones who see an opportunity and make it happen.
Yes. And actually, a lot of what motivated me was as an entrepreneur
Yeah.
and working with fellow entrepreneurs in EO and around the community.
Yeah.
I realized that this is a different class of people. These people all have chutzpah. Now the
Mm,
question is, are they stronger in some of these characteristics versus others.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's what led to the model. But we think about it, chutzpah has been around since the beginning of time, since the beginning of humankind. It's we can think of every great accomplishment, and it's global. Although
Mm,
chutzpah itself is I believe, a Yiddish word.
okay.
There's a word, a Finnish word, sisu, sisu,
All
that
right.
if you look that up, the definition, you'll say, hey, this is a pretty good definition of chutzpah too. But it's who knew that they spoke Yiddish in Helsinki? I never would have guessed that, right? So clearly they don't. All of our cultures recognize people and actions that stretch boundaries, that
Yeah.
lead to either, I mean, you can certainly fail, but also lead to major changes. I
Yeah.
sometimes ask people, I had fun with this. I ask people, what are some of the earliest recorded moments of chutzpah in humankind you can think of?
Okay. Okay.
Huh?
That's an interesting one.
And it's a tough question.
Yeah.
And I'll have people talk about the early explorers. If
Yeah.
they're biblical, they'll say, well, that would be Adam and Eve. You
Yeah.
basically had an authority figure saying, don't go near that apple.
Yeah.
Don't eat
That's
the apple. I tend to think in terms of man's learning to manage fire, because we think about humankind.
yeah.
The Nobody developed fire. Lightning hits a tree,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
It
all of
happens.
the humans at the time gather around. They're curious once they think that, oh, maybe I'm okay, and
Yeah.
they feel the heat, they see the light.
Yeah.
And when I think of who is the first person to stick his hand in that, get burnt, and say, "Oh," and everybody else laughs at him as if they were at a college fraternity party, going, "Ha, he always does the dumb crap," right? And then his partner, I'll say, wife wouldn't have worked at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm assuming a heterosexual relationship here. I get that, but she realizes, wait a second, it's the wood that's burning. I wonder if I pick up the piece of the wood that's not burning, if I'm okay.
Yeah.
So she reaches in, picks that up, and then ooh, suddenly she's got a torch, which they
Yeah.
take back to their cave. And I tend to think of it as a nice one-bedroom cave overlooking the plains. And now they have a source of heat,
Yeah. Yeah.
defense against wild animals,
Nice.
and eventually cooking. And then the first entrepreneur probably evolved from that, the guy who brought out sticks and started selling fire to his neighbors.
I love it.
So
I love it.
if we think about any of these major events,
Yeah.
and it's not all about companies and entrepreneurs, it's historical, it's political,
Yeah.
it's what led to life changes. The
Yeah.
printing press was an
Yeah.
act of chutzpah,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Very few people read.
Yeah. It's
So,
interesting when you say that. You're right. I'm just writing that down there because I think those events in history, as somebody who does things differently. So I mentioned before, I was in LA recently, and we went up to the Griffiths Observatory, which I love going up there to see across LA. But I also love it from a point of view of exploring the planets to see what else is out there. And
yes,
you just have to look at some of the technology that was created in the past to examine the planets. And you look at some of the people like Galileo who had that view of what they could do differently, and those people who stood up and said, no, the world's not like this. The sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. And they were held up as a heretic for that, doing that same
right?
thing. And I think there's
Heretic,
something there.
madman, yeah,
Yeah, madman for doing it. So, and having been in the US, Columbus, getting on a ship and sailing across the
yes,
ocean, landing on Plymouth Rock. It's all those things that actually, that's people who do things differently, who step out
yes,
and do it. And we talk in leadership about having leaders and followers, and often a leader is really good at creating followership by getting people on there because they've got this guiding light. We often talk about a north star in the sense of what's your guiding light, what's the thing that can get you there. I use the word purpose more often than not, but actually that's those guys who have got that purpose and say we're going to sail across that flat earth because we believe there's something else across the horizon, and that's the
And
bit
it's
I'm hearing there.
interesting your use of the word purpose. I mentioned that each of the letters of chutzpah stands for one of the key behaviors. The
Yeah,
P stands for purpose.
got it.
And I share why that's so critical for chutzpah.
Yeah,
And something else you said about leaders motivating, inspiring their followers to do things. There's another characteristic of leadership in my mind, and that is to take the chutzpah they have and move it into the culture of their team.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
Because having it for yourself is great, but creating a team, a company
yeah,
of people with chutzpah, people who are willing to take risks,
yeah.
to step up in a meeting and challenge somebody else in a nice way and say, look, I think there's a better approach that we have
That's
instead of
interesting.
sitting back. That
Yeah,
makes companies.
yeah.
That saves companies. I read recently, we're all familiar with Blockbuster.
Mm.
Did you have Blockbuster in the UK?
Yeah, yeah, we did. I've still got my Blockbuster card because I used the Blockbuster card as an example of a business that got it wrong.
Okay, very good. Well, then I I think that's something you should hold on to. That's something that one should pass on to one's children and grandchildren. So don't get rid of that.
That's
But
funny. Yeah.
okay, so I read something recently about Blockbuster. We all know that they made some errors in not seeing that the business was changing dramatically,
Mm.
and streaming was going to be the better way to go. They had moved, I believe, to a slight subscription basis, but most of their clients were still one and done. They'd rent and they'd return.
Yeah.
And when it came time for them to truly evaluate what this startup company Netflix was doing, this is pre-streaming.
Yeah.
Netflix had the thought of streaming, is my understanding.
Yeah, they did.
But what they did was a subscription basis, and they did something that Blockbuster would never consider. There were no late fees in their
Hmm.
service. Okay. Well, Blockbuster, when faced with the thought of pivoting, were really changing the dynamic of their company. They
Yeah.
were a retail store and they needed to become a technology company. They
Yeah.
had the resources. They were the leader probably worldwide. Certainly in the US, you couldn't go 100 feet without another Blockbuster store.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
always one there. And what I read was that the board of directors opposed the idea of even testing or fooling with the streaming concept. And the reason was apparently something like 11 or 12% of all of Blockbuster's multi-billion dollars in revenue came from late fees.
Wow. Okay,
So
that's
they
interesting.
were worried about the short-term impact of losing
That bit
late
of
fee revenue,
yeah.
which was pure margin. I understand why you'd want to hold on to
Yeah.
that. But there are enough lessons throughout history in small and big corporations about
Yeah.
people saying, I'm going to focus on the short term. And then they suddenly find themselves without a company.
Yeah.
And they then lost their lead. Technology took over and they could not come back.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's
I
it's
mean,
a fascinating story actually that, and I think you're right. It's someone who's not got that vision of what could be in the future, and also, you know, Blockbuster and Netflix had conversations, and actually one was looking to buy the other, and they said no.
right,
That's yeah.
right.
So, so
Different visions.
yeah, it is different visions, exactly. Different visions from different position. So let's talk through these 8 steps. I think this is the key bit here. So I think if you think about what those 8 steps are, the CHUTZPAH, why don't we go through those and just find out a bit more about them because I think there's some fascinating pieces in there. So um,
Sure. Well, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the C,
yeah,
first letter in the word chutzpah. And this takes us back to, and it also shows that chutzpah is not new. It
yeah,
has been around forever. Okay. So if we think back to our high school Latin, if we stayed awake through our high school Latin classes, there's a phrase for seize the day, seize the
yeah.
opportunity, and it's
Carpe,
carpe diem.
love it.
And that's the first characteristic of chutzpah. Some people, when they learn of an opportunity or they're innovative and they think of something, say, this is too good to not move on. Or they
Mm,
even learn of a new job in a newer, faster growing company. They might say to themselves, because chutzpah is for everybody, it's not just for entrepreneurs. Anybody can have chutzpah. You can
mm,
work for somebody and have chutzpah.
mm.
They think to themselves, ooh, but I'm safe here and I've got some seniority and I've got some vacation coming up and I haven't put my resume together. I'm going to pass on applying for this.
Yeah, yeah,
So that would be the anti-carpe diem. That's
yeah,
not about seizing the day.
yeah.
Now, the other key element of seizing the day, it's not about a one and done. It's like, oh, I made this move once. I asked the perfect girl to the prom in high school. and that's the person I married. Wonderful. But what have you done since? So we
Yeah, the flat
can, we
line.
all, right, it's a flat line. We all have these capabilities, these behaviors, these characteristics within our reach,
Mm,
or we're accustomed to them. Some of them do them very well. When we start doing them automatically, is when we start, you don't have to think about, ooh, should I take this risk? So carpe diem, I'll give you an example.
yeah.
This is actually a woman by the name of Barbara, early 20s. All through school, she was considered the slow one, the dumb one. She actually, and it had not been diagnosed, had dyslexia. So learning was a different challenge for her. She wasn't dumb, she wasn't behind, but
Mm,
the teachers never quite understood what was going on, and therefore she became the object of ridicule. By the time she was in her early 20s, she'd had, as she describes it, 20 plus jobs. She was in real estate, office work, working as a server in a restaurant. This particular time, uh, she was working as a waitress, and her boyfriend at the time said, "You know, you always talk about how you like real estate, how you think you could do a good job. You don't have the
yeah.
money. I'm going to spot you some money to start the company, and I will own. I think it was $1,000, maybe 10,000, but it might have been 1,000, but no more than 10,000." And he said, "And because I'm the money guy, I have half the company, and you have half the company because you're the
Okay.
operations person."
Yeah.
She, without hesitation, says, "This is great. I'm going to start working in real estate. I'm going to make some sales. I'm going to hire some people, move into an office." That was the plan you could fit onto the napkin there at the diner that she was working in. Well, she accomplishes that. The years go past. She's making sales right and left. She hires people. She trains them. She motivates them.
Yeah.
They move into an office. This is in New York City. And real estate, for the most part, is a very male dominated field at the time,
Okay.
particularly commercial real estate. Well, 10 years in, everybody, I mean, the company's grown. They have, I think, 14 employees. Uh, the boyfriend surprises her. And basically, it's Barbara, I have some news. I've fallen in love with the receptionist and I'm going to marry her. However, we can keep the company going if you'd like, or we can split it up. Okay. Here's where Carpe Diem comes into play again. She
Okay.
said, "We're splitting it up. Okay. I'm not going to work with you. I don't trust you as my business partner
Fair,
right
fair,
now
fair
after
point.
this." So they decide who's going to take what employees, what clients at the time. They create two companies, but his parting words to her is, "You know, you're never going to make it without me."
Huh.
Well, are you familiar with Barbara Corcoran by any chance of Shark Tank or Corcoran Real
Oh,
Estate?
cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. That's Barbara.
That is that is the Barbara we're speaking about.
Wow. Love it. Okay.
So she's a great illustration, lifelong, of
Yeah.
doing things, not just saying, "Well, that's a good idea, but I'm going to put it off," or
Yeah.
"I need to research it to death."
Yeah. Do it.
She moved and she made her errors.
Yeah.
Everybody makes errors. When you make a lot of decisions, you can't have 1,000 batting percentage.
Yeah. But I love
So
that.
that's that first one.
I love that. Okay, I love that. So we got carpe diem, and I come back to that point. Whenever I hear the word carpe diem, I just can't help think about Dead Poets Society and Robin Williams. So we'll put that one
Oh,
aside, but I
that's
think that
right.
still comes to my mind.
It's
Um,
funny. It's funny you mention that because in my book there is a quote from Robin Williams and Dead Poet Society.
yeah, and I still love it. I still hear his voice in my head. That carpe diem,
Yes,
carpe diem.
yes.
Great one. So
And that was a
movie.
serious role too.
Yeah, it was. You know, that was a great. And I still think it's a great film. I haven't watched it for a long time, but I think that's one of his best films. He produced many good films, and that was one of them. So
Yes.
yeah, rest his soul. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so next H, handling objection.
H. Okay, yes, it's called handling objections. So let's think. From the day we're born, we have needs, and we express those needs. As a baby who can't speak, it's through crying. And sometimes we get those needs met immediately, sometimes we don't. One thing I've learned is that we all handle objections on a very regular basis at home and at work. And some of us are just better at handling those objections
Yeah,
than others. To me, it's fundamental communication skills that aren't necessarily taught. So for example, if you try and handling an objection by speaking over somebody, you're probably going to fail. That's an easy one. It's the old expression, are you listening to respond or are you listening to understand?
Yeah.
Too
Yeah.
often people are listening to respond. Well, you need to listen to understand if you have any chance at handling objections.
Yeah.
Now, salespeople are actually trained in this skill. Listening, repeating back what it is they heard so that people are aligned. And yes, no, you missed something important here. Okay, good. I'm glad you corrected me on that. So as I understand it, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
From there, you have a foundation for moving forward potentially, because now you know what you need to overcome in the objection. And if it's a misconception, well, no, I wouldn't use you because I don't believe your product has as good a warranty as your competitors. And
Okay.
then it's
Fair
like,
enough.
okay, so if I'm listening to you correctly, your concern is warranty after the initial period, right? Because yes, that's what it is. Well, then you'll be pleased to learn that actually our warranty is equivalent, but we also have an extended warranty.
Yeah.
So we can work with you on that. When you get a full set of objections, you can move forward. The most
Mm.
difficult thing about selling or persuasion, well, let's keep it on selling because we're talking about that now,
Yeah.
is people basically have a natural tendency to stay where they are. It's not perfect,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the hassle of moving, of making a decision,
Yeah.
of letting others in your company know that you did what and why, only for this, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So one has to overcome objections and create value sufficient for people to get off of their inertia,
Yeah.
to move from their status.
And the bit I hear there is
The
creating
skill set
value.
of Mhm.
The
Yeah,
bit,
creating
yeah,
value is
it's
a
a value
critical
piece.
part.
Yeah. Yeah.
hmm And in handling objections, if you're not successful at creating value, you're not going to overcome the objection. Now, the best salespeople or the best communicators already have a sense of some of the objections that are coming that way, and they can at times during a conversation even head off that objection by covering. So if you believe that every salesperson who goes into a meeting and doesn't expect a price objection is probably needs to go back to selling school.
Yeah. Get back to the
Yeah,
beginning.
because objections are almost universal.
Yeah.
So you can wait for the price objection, which is like the prospect putting a stake in the ground. You're priced too high. Or by addressing it earlier and
Mm.
creating the value in what you're doing, you're saying, you know, I've spoken to you about our service, 24 hours guaranteed. I've spoken to you about these additional needs of yours that we can handle through our
Yeah.
software or through our equipment, whatever it is that you have. And this leads to a better solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which also was why you're going to find we're priced a bit higher than the competition.
Yeah. And you put it out there
So
up front.
you put it out up front, but you've also created the value as to why you're higher. So
Yeah.
if they do come in and they raise price again, you can say, well, yes, you're comparing us to somebody who doesn't provide 24-hour service for your office machines, as an example.
Yeah. Love
So
that.
that's what, in essence, part of the difference of what you're paying for.
Yeah.
You're also paying for R&D, newer technology, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're good and you anticipate the objections, you're ready for them, or you can kind of minimize them through your presentation or through the conversation.
Yeah. And I guess that comes into this next piece, doesn't it? So just looking at the list here, the next bit, the U in chutzpah, the understanding needs, because I think we talk a bit about that, because I think they come really closely together. The handling objections,
Yes,
then understanding needs. You've got to understand needs, because if you understand that, you can flip it and understand the objections that might come out as a result of that as well. So I wonder whether we just dive into that as a segue to think about the understanding of needs at this point.
100%. And it does lead into it because understanding need, pain, and opportunity is the
Yeah.
next of those characteristics. And when you start understand, and there are differences.
Okay.
Everybody has needs, but as I said, we may not choose not to act on them because they're not critical enough, right? I could use a new car, but I don't need it right now.
Mm.
Well, what if it stops twice when you're taking the kids to school and you have to call a tow truck.
Yeah.
And you start worrying about whether or not you're going to have a problem down the road. I'm using this example. It's actually real life. I was working with a woman who was describing she had an older car and that she's been having a problem with it. And I knew that she had three young children.
Yeah.
And I said, "What have you done?" He goes, "Well, my husband says he can fix it at some point, but I really don't think he can. But I'm going to hold off." And I offhandedly said, "You take the kids to school. Have you ever had an issue where the car is stopped while you were driving, you were in traffic?
Mm.
You haven't been able to start it to get home?" She said, "Yeah, but not for a while." Well, within a week, she had a different car.
Lovely.
And what happened was, and I wasn't selling, but I was trying to understand what her need was and then what the potential pain would be
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if worst case scenario happened.
Yeah. And I think that's the fascinating piece, isn't it? Because once you understand the need, and whether you're in sales or whether you're creating a business, actually you've got to understand the needs of the customers, and there's got to be a pain big enough that they're willing to move away from to do something about.
Yes.
I look at my dog. I've got a dog, and the dog's here, and often the dog will not move. It will lay on the most uncomfortable place because it's just too lazy. It's just there's no the pain's not big enough for it to move along. Whereas if you
Right.
find a human being, they'll be sitting up, they'll move straight away. But the dog's just lazy. It doesn't have any real need to move apart from being fed, walked, and played with occasionally. And I think
That's
sometimes humans become like that.
well, and I'd say even companies. It's a great
Yeah,
analogy. We get very comfortable sitting where we are. Look, I'm satisfied and I'm doing well. Why should
yeah,
I try something different?
yeah,
Well, the reason you have to try something different is because your competition isn't sleeping,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So they are. And by the way, the opportunity side, because it used to be uncovering need and pain, which is critical for creating value.
yeah,
The opportunity arose because sometimes you find different opportunities that don't even arise from a recognized need. Now, what I mean by this is when Starbucks first opened up
mm,
a couple decades back, I had no trouble getting coffee.
yeah,
I could
yeah,
find coffee at a number of places,
yeah,
but I didn't have the consistency.
yeah,
And I didn't have the benefit of drinking coffee in a cup that I felt good about because of the brand. So they uncovered two needs. One was consistency. Well, actually, multiple needs, but consistency. Uh, Storefronts all over the country as they expanded quickly,
yeah,
but also the idea because Starbucks well, used to be considerably higher than what I was paying for coffee at the local convenience store.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. So why would I make the switch for something that I considered pretty much, there's not much difference between one versus another?
yeah. Coffee's
Well, I
coffee.
did like their taste, but I don't know that I was justifying it for that. Part of it was that they positioned themselves as the luxury brand.
Mm,
You know, our friend Vern Harnish used to talk about this. They
yeah,
position themselves as the luxury brand, but unlike a Rolls Royce, they were the affordable luxury.
yeah,
So they were the top of the coffee food chain.
yeah, yeah,
For a little bit more, we could all be driving that Rolls Royce,
yeah.
sipping the best, the top of the coffee.
I love that. And actually, it's
So
interesting.
they
That's
created that opportunity.
Yeah. I love that as a story because looking at the way Starbucks comes about, and now you and I go out and there's coffee shops everywhere. But when Starbucks was created, in the same way we had in the UK, coffee shops didn't exist in the same way they are now. They've been around for
Right.
hundreds of years in the UK, literally, but actually not to that same degree. We had tea shops doing the same things, but actually it's come up with a brand that stands out there. So actually, you're right, understanding the pain and the need, but actually looking at the characteristics, what the customer wants, helps you create that better business idea in the first place.
And then they saw this opportunity to be different, to not just sell coffee from a
Yeah.
restaurant or a diner in a to-go cup,
Yeah.
but to make that the focus of what you were doing.
Yeah. And I
So
guess
that
that,
was the opportunity they saw first.
yeah. So I guess that I'm going to segue into the next piece in that case, because I think there's a clear segue and I can see how you built this up now, having looked at the list in front of me. Because once you understand the needs, once you understand the objections, you've then got to do something about it. So talk about the T, because I think this links into it really nicely.
Sure. Well, thank you. These I hadn't been thinking about it as the links. I see them as eight separate pieces, but now I see, hey, I'm going to need your help on my next book. But
Give me a
that
call.
it does follow.
Yeah.
Okay, so the T stands for trailblaze.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I think about what is a trailblazer, people will say, well, they're the ones willing again to stretch boundaries, to go places people haven't gone before, uh, to try things. Well, the other definition, in my mind, is somebody who is willing to risk failure or derision,
Yeah.
insults, laughter, because
Yeah.
their ideas are so different. They are disruptors.
Yeah. That's
So
key.
let's
That's
think.
key.
Think of a good story on the trailblazing side. I don't know if you have some, but I've got one that might fit.
Yeah, go for
And
it. 'Cause I've got a couple I'm thinking
okay,
actually, but go for it from what your angle is there. Go for it.
okay. So we think about uh, about 20 years ago, I think it was, at a business conference in Paris.
Mm,
Uh, Global conference. There are people from all over. Two people, successful entrepreneurs, had sold their companies. They had a good deal of money. I think you
mm.
have a sense for where this one might be going because you have so much business knowledge.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
I know that.
and
Yeah.
they go outside from the conference and they're trying to hail a cab to get back to their hotel, but there's a snowstorm
Mm,
and cabs are nowhere to be found. Or if they're on the street, they're already occupied.
yeah,
It's not like, oh, I can easily get a cab. And they think to themselves, God, we all have these things called cell phones. Why can't we just get a cab from our phone instead of having to be out here trying to hail something in a snowstorm?
yeah, yeah,
And that was the genesis. That was the birth of the concept for Uber cab,
yeah, yeah.
which they dropped the cab and became Uber.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting actually because I think there's another piece to that story which I think is really key as well because what they also what Travis I can't remember his surname now what Travis recognized at that point in time when they were creating that was something else as well. The frustration you and I have waiting for a cab is will it turn up? Where is it? How long do I have to wait here? Has it missed me? I'm stood on the street corner. Whereas what they said is actually let's develop an app where you can track where the driver is. The driver can correspond with you straight up so we understand the biggest need that people have about cabs is where's the driver? When's he going to be here? Because if you know where they're going to come up here and we can track them, you're almost gamifying it, but you had to step out and do something different about it. So I think there's something there in terms of that trailblazing. Come up with an idea that actually other people follow now. We look about parcel delivery companies. Some get that right as well, where you can track your parcel. Your parcel is 3 stops away from you now. The parcel's 2 stops away from you. Uber the guys who got out there and started doing that in the first place. So I love that as a story. It's a nice piece there, actually. Love that
And
trailblazing.
then if we even think about the carpe diem, they thought of the idea, they put together the business plan, they raised money.
Yeah.
Handling objections. Can you imagine the objections coming at them? And that came out when they were when they were speaking with the
Yeah.
private equity folk. It's like there are taxi and limousine commissions in every state, in every major city around the world. They're not going to allow you to compete.
Yeah.
That's their bread and butter. They make fees off of this. You
Yeah.
have to get past the legal side. You have to get certified. You need to have medallions if you're in New York City. You'll never be able to reach the level you want.
Yeah.
Um, and as far as the uncovering need, pain, and opportunity, they saw an opportunity because
Yeah.
they understood the pain of standing outside in a snowstorm in
Yeah.
Paris.
Yeah.
So
And I think the other
people
bit that
might
comes
have,
the
yeah,
bit that
go
comes
on.
back to me as well, when you talk about Carpe Diem, because I then come back to Nike's Just Do It. Because I think Carpe Diem and Nike, same thing in that sense.
Yes.
Actually, what they did was they said, let's just do it. Let's find a way. And I think that's the big piece about those trailblazers. Those chutzpah guys have that ability to say, just do it. What's the worst that can happen? We'll learn some lessons. We might
Yeah.
fail, but we'll learn some lessons on the way. And I think there's something there about finding other ways of doing it as well. So that trailblazing, getting out there, creating the viewing. When I think of trailblazing, I think of pioneers. And you and I,
Right.
we were talking earlier about me coming back from California. Last time I was in California 4 years ago, we decided to do another trip through Death Valley. And I love Death Valley for lots of different reasons. But the guys who cut across Death Valley in the 1800s in their wagons, they were trailblazers.
Yes.
They were heading west trying to find stuff. And
Yeah.
they had to get across that place. So, and if you hear the story of what happened through Death Valley, you realize those trailblazers were the ones who were the real pioneers, heading for
Yes.
the land out there beyond where they were. So I think there's something
And
about that pioneering spirit.
and they still exist today. Let's look at SpaceX and Elon Musk,
Yeah.
right? And now it's a different type of pioneering, but when you
Yeah.
are the first to say, hey, why do we need governments to build rockets
Mm.
that we can do it more efficiently? We can build reusable rockets,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And now we have the billionaires club with, okay, who's going to be the first one
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
let's all get our own rockets up there.
Well, there's
Uh, so
Jeff or Elon together.
right. And then even on a smaller side, I've always said that the person, my family, by the way, my parents are immigrants. They came from Eastern Europe to the US.
Okay.
Okay. So in our case, we were all fortunate. We went to college here and actually even advanced. I have a graduate degree, but I knew a lot of people whose families nobody had ever gone on to college, and they were reluctant to make the decision. Well, the person in a family that is the first to go to college is a trailblazer, sets an example for others, sets a
Yeah.
path,
Yeah.
does all those chutzpah characteristics we've spoken about.
Mm.
So again, you don't have to be an Elon Musk with SpaceX. You don't have
Yeah.
to be a pioneer in the
Yeah.
1800s, although they certainly were trailblazers
Yeah.
too.
Actually, that's
You don't have to found Uber.
yeah.
You can be a trailblazer in everyday life as well.
Yeah. And I think there's a big thing around that, isn't it? Because a lot of people think they can't do it. And one of the books I've got up on my bookshelf there is from a guy who unfortunately is dead now, but actually it was a book all around just getting up there. And he talked about being, it was all the yes butters around us. And what Clive got talked about in there is, there's lots of yes, but yes, we could do that, but it won't work. Or yes, but we tried it before. And sometimes you've got to just go up against that and say, yes, but it could work. Yes, but it could. And I think there's something there about, let's just give it a go. And I think from my point of view, I'm always looking at those things of what else can we do differently?
It's a great point about the but being what interrupts things. If somebody was there and had say at that meeting with a blockbuster,
Yeah.
we could go in that direction, but then we're going to lose a significant amount of our profit
Yeah.
because we won't have late fees.
Yeah.
If someone has said, well, can't you do something? Can you tie them in and add streaming while at the same time moving away from this model?
Yeah.
You need that person in the meeting
You
to
do.
say, "Excuse me, CEO, what about this?"
Yeah. And
Or
actually,
Mr. Director. Yeah.
to me, that's almost that entrepreneurial spirit, isn't it? So I think a lot of businesses talk about leadership and management. We all go out and do leadership management courses, but actually there's something about entrepreneurialism. We need entrepreneurs in our business, and we need to create teams of entrepreneurs who can stand up and challenge people. And one of my favorite management books is The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni.
Yes.
And in there, he talks about the fact that, you've got to be able to challenge people in a good way, because to do that, you've got to have trust. You've got to trust people. And often businesses don't trust. And it's always the leader who shouts loudest, who butts everyone down. So actually, you've got to have that person who's willing to say, yes, boss, but what about if we did try? What could we do differently? And you hear about these business failures over the last 30, 40, 50 years, or beyond, 100 years, looking at the railroads being put out of business. Actually, some of the view is we need to look at how to challenge that thinking, because only when you have someone willing to stand up and say, hey, what about this? And I think that's one of the things that I come up against now in business. How do we create that entrepreneurial spirit where I'm
Right.
willing to stand up and challenge my boss, because he might
Yeah.
not know all the answers, or she might not know all the
Right.
answers.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You had we can do this, but the flip side of the coin is saying, I think this is a good idea. Now, as a team, let's figure out every way this could potentially fail.
Yeah,
Because if we're
yeah,
anticipating what would cause us to fail, we
yeah,
can start building in, okay, well, if it's going to be whatever the reason that they can come up with. Well, we don't want to go with streaming of movies, say that going back to the Blockbuster example,
yeah,
because what if the streaming doesn't work? Well, if it fails, technology will continue improving, but we also still have our foundational business.
yeah. Got two businesses, run two horses. Yeah,
Right.
I love that. I love that. There's a great point there, actually. So let's move on to the next point, because I can see the linkage here coming out here. So we've got the Trailblazers. They're out there. They've got a roadblock ahead of them. Something's come up in front of them. So talk me about the Z, because I think this is where we're actually going to go somewhere different.
Okay. The Z for my friends across the pond, the Z for my friends here on the American side, stands for zigzag.
Yeah, I love it.
Now, that's an interesting concept. Why zigzag? Well, sometimes there are objections or problems that are beyond solving very easily. Or
Yeah,
if you're a salesperson and somebody tells you no 4 times, you after a while you learn this person isn't changing. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe he's buying from his brother-in-law and he's not telling me. I don't know. I actually had that happen to me once, by the way. Somebody was buying from a
someone out
relative,
there.
just didn't share that
Yeah,
as
yeah,
much as I tried. We learned to say, okay, we don't have to overcome or handle 100% of the objections to be successful. We have to learn when to move on. But
mm,
sometimes there are barricades thrown in your way. No, decline. I'm not going to do this. You're trying to finance a business. Bank after bank after bank say no. What can you do? If
yeah,
you are, actually, let's go with an example you might be familiar with. An author whose book was rejected, I believe it was 13 times.
yeah,
Um, and the author was as close to poverty level as one
yeah.
could be.
And she did well afterwards.
Yes, because we're speaking about the same person here.
Yeah,
So the publisher of Harry Potter
yeah,
basically had the manuscript and was like, I don't know that this is the type of thing that we do. Let me give it to my child, to my daughter, and we'll see
yeah,
what she thinks.
yeah,
Well, the feedback was, this is the best thing I've ever read. When's the next one coming out?
yeah, yeah. I love it.
And that's what led to J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter finally getting a publisher. Now, if we think about that, how many times will we go and bang our head against the wall and people are saying no? 2 times, 3 times,
Mm,
four?
mm,
Well, she went to 13 different publishers. And the lesson here, by the way, is that sometimes the experts are wrong.
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes the people who we trust to have insights that we don't have are blinded by their own
yeah,
biases.
yeah,
It's interesting. I read something about also J.K. Rowling. Why not Joanne Rowling? Because that was her name. Well, as I understand it, the publisher said, "Well, look, this is a book. We see the market as being young boys who are interested in this wizardry and the schooling. That's our primary market, and we
right.
don't think they're going to buy a book from a female author. Talk about a bias. So that's why it was J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's but interesting story, isn't it? Because we know through history of all of those type of people who've got the same issues. The Walt Disney going through to every bank trying to help him get a small loan to start off his amusement park idea. From my
Yes.
perspective, there's lots of people out there who have tried it many times and knocked on many doors. And
Yeah.
interesting, it comes back, this handing objections. Part of the objection, I think, is when people's own mind where if I think about those people who give up early, they're the ones who say to themselves, yeah, maybe they're right. Maybe I should have listened to my dad when he said it wouldn't work. Well, he's right after all. And they fall into their own trap of objections that they've been told, and that becomes their own objection to building their business. So I'm just throwing that out there. I think actually,
You were right. You had said one of the definitions of chutzpah early on when we first started our discussion, our conversation, was persistence.
yeah,
Zigzag is about persistence. Zigzag is about recognizing there are always obstacles in our way.
yeah.
By the way, the whole zigzag concept came to me. Do you remember a video game called Pac-Man?
Wow, that's from the 80s. Yes, I remember that.
Okay, so it was one of the earliest video games.
Yeah,
It's still a classic, but in essence, you had uh, your yellow Pac-Man eating dots and
yeah.
avoiding
The
these, I think they
ghosts.
call them ghosts,
Yeah, I
ghosts
remember
to
that.
get to the next level.
Yeah,
So the dots gave him strength, nourishment, and the ability to sometimes go after the ghosts.
yeah,
But you had to zigzag around that board
yeah. I love
to
it.
get away from those. And
Yeah.
if you were successful, you moved to the next level where you had another challenge and another challenge. And I thought back, I was in graduate school at the time. I said, this is kind of like an interesting uh, color. It's a example of life.
Love
There rarely is a straight path.
Yeah,
And frequently there are issues, legislation, bigger companies, competitors that are going to do everything they can to prevent us from getting to the next level.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
when you learn to zigzag, or you have that mentality, okay, this is tough. I can't raise money the traditional way. I'm not getting money from, or I've tapped out my family and friends. I'm not getting a bank. Certainly, I don't have the history yet for VC,
Mm,
for
mm,
venture capital. What can I do?
yeah.
Well, when I started one of my first companies, I was in that situation, and I ended up structuring a deal with a vendor. So I was using a service from the vendor that generated revenue for me and
Yeah.
revenue for him.
Wow.
So I structured a loan, not equity, but just debt, and said, look, the revenue that comes in, you'll take a higher piece of the revenue that we generate together to pay off my loan. So
Clever.
you have me as a customer. I
Yeah.
have the money I need to grow. We both benefit.
Yeah, yeah. Lovely story. Lovely story. So it actually shows it in real life of how you found the way of doing it. And that zigzagging is about finding a way forwards. And I love the Pac-Man analogy. It's about finding the way through. And we often talk about in scaling up, we're using the language now about, a river will find its easiest course to the ocean.
Yes.
And actually it will find its way around the roadblocks. It will find its way to get there eventually. But it will get there. It will get there. Whereas
Yeah,
in the
that's
past, we talk
actually
about climbing mountains, but actually rivers just find their easy. Nature takes its easiest course, and I think that's
that's
the key bit
interesting
there. That
because you're
zigzag.
right. River's not going to go through a rock. It'll
Yeah,
go around.
yeah. Well, it
It,
might go through, but it'll take a million years. But it will go
yeah,
there eventually. It will there.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's
That,
let's move on. So I think there's something here in that case. Say so J.K. Rowling, Walt Disney, Elon Musk. I talked before about the guiding light. Let's talk about the P because I think the P really becomes clear
uh,
here because this is, in some ways, if we could rearrange the letters in chutzpah and put the P at the beginning, this is where I think it starts. But I think you've got to have P there. But so tell me about P, what this means for you, because I've
sure.
got a big view on this as well.
Purpose to me is one of the critical elements for happiness and success in
Yeah,
life. I'm not talking about business now. It definitely relates to business, but it's about life. Having a purpose, and purposes can change, is critical for getting through the inevitable bad times.
yeah.
There will be things that happen to us that are beyond our control. There is a book, Man's Search for Meaning,
Victor
by
Frankl. Yeah.
uh, one of my favorite books, a very difficult book to read, where
Mm-hmm.
he speaks, where basically the author, Frankl, speaks about purpose being critical, one of two key factors for why people survive the worst of man's inhumanity towards
Inhumanity.
others,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And purpose was there. I had an interesting presentation a couple of years back. I was speaking to a sales force, a large regional sales force for a team, probably 60 people in the room. And it was their quarterly meeting that they brought me in for to do something a little bit inspirational, motivational. And I was speaking about, at the time, I called it the chutzpah rules as opposed to the chutzpah advantage. And as they go through the most valuable player and the most valuable rep, the highest gross revenue, most over quota, all these awards to get people excited about, look, hey, congratulations, that was great. Get people pumped up. The last award they got to was that most valuable player or rep for the quarter. And here I am thinking, okay, I'm going on stage in a couple of minutes. But in the back, I heard them say, and this rep achieved something like 106% of quota for the quarter. And that caught my attention because other people had hit 230%, right? The most above. And I thought to myself, whoa, I'm missing something here. And I stopped looking at my notes and I listened. And what I learned was that this rep, uh, about a year before, had been a successful rep, but lost his wife to cancer and was raising his two kids by himself. And his sales dropped. The company stuck with him, and he came up to speak. And in essence, what helped get him through this terrible period in his life, or what helped was getting him through, because I can't say that he was done in a year. That lives with you a lot longer in a lot of cases. was his purpose. He realized at that point that his purpose had become raising his kids, giving them the foundation they needed because they were right now at a disadvantage with only one parent, with their mother gone. So purpose certainly helps us individually,
I think
but
that's really
purpose also
powerful.
provides, right, that North Star, that
Mm,
guiding light for companies.
mm,
Why ultimately are we here? Well, we're here to serve the customer. Well, if we do this, is that serving the customer or ourselves? And I'm not talking about being profitable. You can be very profitable while serving the customer. Matter of fact, I think that's the most critical element
yeah,
of
yeah.
profitability.
But I
But
think there's something
sometimes
key there.
it's what I'm sorry.
I was going to say that's the key piece to it, isn't it? It's about understanding
Yes.
your real purposes. I was talking to a client this morning about this, about in her role, what's her purpose for what they do, and I won't say what they do because it will give it away. But actually, is it profit or volume? Was the question we were asking.
Yeah.
And in their market, they're not a volume player. They're a niche player who should be focused on that. But I think you have to get really clear on what your profit is, or what your purpose is before you can make those decisions. And that piece about the guy raising the kids on his own, having a purpose, that's the thing that gets you out there. And I come back to it again. And I'm glad you mentioned Man's Search for Meaning, because to me that's one of my all-time favorite books. It's a very hard read, as you say, but actually when you look at it there, purpose is critical. Those who believed they'd be finished by Christmas are the ones who died. Those who had a purpose above and beyond were the ones who survived. That's the key.
Right. And the other interesting piece about Viktor Frankl's book, it says the other critical element is beyond our control, and that's luck.
Yeah.
So he says, if you had the misfortune, the bad luck of being selected by the guards for the gas chamber, or in a guard's path when he was bored and decided to take target practice,
Yeah.
nothing you could do.
Yeah.
But for those of you who had the good luck to not fall into that bad luck category, that's where purpose and other things came into play,
Yeah.
emotionally to help them through.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
purpose was a key element.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
think,
why it's important to me in the chutzpah model as
yeah,
well.
love
I
that. I
see
think
it
that's
frequently when speaking to people.
yeah, I love that. It's a really key one in that case. So I wonder in that case, we're looking towards the end of the chutzpah rules in that case, or the chutzpah advantage. So wonder, let's think about the A and the H, because I think there's bits in there in terms of where we go. So how does the next bit come into it? Ambiguity minimization. Talk to that, because
Sure.
that's a mouthful in itself.
Yeah, well, it is the ambiguity, minimization, or elimination even. Uh, we all have to make decisions.
Okay.
Leaders have to make sometimes very tough decisions
Yeah.
as to which way to go.
Okay.
Jeff Bezos, by the way, who founded Amazon, speaks about a decision making, a very simple decision making model that he likes to follow. There are numerous exceptional decision making models to help people as they consider options.
Yeah.
He says, at the simplest level, think of it as a door, a swinging door. Well, it's either swings one way for you to go through it, but then once you're through, you can't go back, or
Yeah.
it swings two ways. So you can walk through it and then come back through, like a kitchen door of some kind.
Yeah.
Um, Too often, if we think of decisions as, oh, wow, we're going through this door. If it is an extremely serious decision, one that impacts the future of the company, uh, we mentioned Blockbuster, we're going to forego moving
Yeah.
forward aggressively with streaming video because we don't want to lose the revenue from the late fees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that was a decision that was treated as almost a one-way door.
One
They
way
went
door.
through, they couldn't go back easily.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah.
they had the option beforehand, but once they committed themselves, they lost their opportunities to develop technology, to
Mm.
acquire technology, and before you knew it, Netflix was way ahead of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? So that one-way decision, you better think twice because it can be very difficult to get through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two-way decision is if they had said, let's try this out, start looking at technology, see about how we might build a plan for our users around the world, around the country, at least in the US, and see if we can go subscription and what
And
to think about
yeah.
the idea of streaming.
Yeah.
And we have both running at the same time. That gives you that two-way flexibility because now you can test. And if something doesn't work, you go back through that door, you change your approach, and then you go through and you implement
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the key to making decisions is understanding there's always going to be ambiguity.
Mm.
Rarely can we be 100% sure that something is going to happen. Sports is a great example. You find the team that is so qualified to win the English Football League trophy because they've dominated everybody. I'm going there because I've got a baseball
Yeah.
slate full of and they're playing a much weaker team, and everybody's wagering on the team that's stronger because on paper, the likelihood that they're going to lose is real slim.
Yeah.
Well, we all know that they can lose. So, what do we do to minimize the ambiguity? Do we look at what would lead to an upset in this scenario?
Yeah.
Is the team that we know is better on the road? Do they have any injured players? Are they coming off a tough win against a real strong competitor? Maybe they're going to have a letdown. All these things can be factored into the ambiguity
Yeah.
to reach a decision
Yeah. And
and
it's the
whether or not it's a
reduction.
decision.
It's
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think about, a lot of time over the last 2 years with the COVID pandemic and what we're leading to now, we talk about a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And from a point of view of making decisions, if we can minimize the uncertainty by reducing the ambiguity or doing something about it, then we've got a better way to move forward. Because actually, it's going to be volatile, it's going to be complex. But how do we minimize the uncertainty? And actually, by minimizing or eliminating the ambiguity, you make your job easier. You've got a narrower target to aim at.
Yes. And a greater probability of success in the long term. You'll still make mistakes. We get
Yeah,
that. But you make enough decisions that the good decisions,
yeah,
when done
on balance.
properly, will more than outweigh. And
Yeah,
actually, I like ambiguity reduction.
yeah.
That's actually easier. It flows off my tongue better. But the advantage of minimization, I think it's the only 5-syllable word I use in my book.
I love it. It's the hardest word to pronounce when you get the two of them together. I love that. So this is the final one. Okay, let's lead into the first one because I think there's something here about this final one which I think is something that everybody who's successful has to some degree. You have to have this next piece because if you haven't got it, when you do have a fall, it's going to be harder. And part of building your business up is actually be able to manage these things. So I wonder how, from your perspective, do you think we deal with that next one, that final piece, the H?
Right. The final letter, the second H in chutzpah, stands for humility. Now, a lot of people say humility. Do you really need humility for chutzpah? If anything, you need to be a bit more arrogant, overly confident, self-confident. You've got to exude your certainty. Where does humility come into play? Well, we know that a lot of the best leaders, I don't want to say all, because there are people who are successful without humility. But this is one of those that I believe, and the research shows, create more loyal teams,
Mm,
stronger teams, and that benefits you particularly in longevity. If people stay with you or stay with your company because your leadership makes a difference,
yeah,
it's important.
yeah.
I wasn't going to use this example, but you just made me think of it. About coming up on, I think, 6 months when Russia attacked Ukraine.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this wasn't all that much past when, and I'm speaking from the US perspective,
Mm,
when we saw in Afghanistan the Taliban moving closer to taking Kabul and
yeah.
taking control of the government.
Mm,
Well, in Afghanistan, I guess the US intelligence said they can hold off for several weeks against the Taliban. But what happened was their leaders fled the capital, and basically Kabul was overrun in days, really
yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
It ended. Okay. Now let's contrast that. This time, US intelligence said, oh boy, Russia is going to control this in a matter of days.
Mm,
Ukraine will not be able to withstand Russia's military. Well, here we are, and we're coming up, I believe, on 6 months now,
mm. 28th February. Yeah.
where Ukraine is still holding its own. They're losing territory, but you have not had this collapse that a lot of people expected. And why do I think, what is one of the reasons for that? Well, we know that the president of Ukraine basically, when offered the opportunity to set up his government in elsewhere in a
Mm.
safer country and
Stay
run from
there.
there,
Yeah.
basically the response was something to the effect of, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition.
Yeah.
I'm staying. Well,
Yeah.
what does that say to the team
Yeah.
when the leader says, "Hey, I'm like you. I'm in the trenches with you. I'm not asking you to do something that I would not do."
Yeah.
That's humility.
Yeah.
Humility also includes for leaders accepting responsibility when you're wrong.
Mm.
So if there's an error, saying, "Okay, I made a decision that hasn't worked out. We're going to backtrack now." Okay, my apologies, my error.
Yeah.
We're gonna correct now, and we're gonna be stronger for it.
Yeah.
As opposed to that same leader saying, "Oh my God, we're in trouble. Who can I fire? Who can I blame?"
Yeah. In it
When you
together.
accept, right, when you accept the responsibility for your decisions,
Yeah.
as opposed to only claiming genius when something goes right. Like
Yeah.
there's an old expression. I think it's success has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody wants to take responsibility for the failure. Well, humility says, yes, it's okay to take responsibility because you have chutzpah and you know that failure is part of the game. It's part
Yeah.
of the life
I
that
love
we all live.
Yeah. So interesting, isn't it, to end on that point? Because I think that's the key, isn't it? So as we talk through those things, carpe diem, handle objections, uncover the needs, trailblaze, zigzag, purpose, minimize or reduce ambiguity, and then the humility. So there's some real nuggets there in terms of those 8 steps as you take us through that journey of what chutzpah means. But actually, when you relate it to business, to life, to society, politics, you can see actually there's people out there who have this already. They have that chutzpah. And actually, when you look at what you've created there and those that 8 steps, you can learn to do things differently in each one of those if you choose to as well. So there's other ways of doing it. So I think there's a lovely model there that you've created over the years. Um, Here's a question for you. And I know we're coming to the end of what we've got to talk about now, but if you were to go back in time with what you now know about chutzpah and where you've been, what would you wish or what would you say to yourself or give to yourself that would enable you to get that advantage that you now see?
Well, first thing comes to mind, I probably would have asked Sarah to prom instead of waiting and she got asked by somebody else.
I love
But
that.
that gets to the key, and that is that it's okay to be told no. We're going to recover. It's okay to fail in a lot of cases. We're going to recover if our mindset is right. But stretching our boundaries, taking more risks
Mm,
brings more opportunities, potentially a lot more joy. And
yeah,
maybe Sarah would have said yes to me. Who knows?
I
Right.
love it.
So stretching boundaries is what I'd recommend. That's what I would have
Yeah,
changed. Growing
yeah,
up, I would have stretched more boundaries. I
yeah,
would have spoken up more. I
yeah.
wouldn't have worried about what other people thought or
Mm,
if they were making fun of me behind my back.
that's
So,
interesting. I think that's an interesting that comes as maturity, doesn't that wisdom that you've got there? Because I think a lot of people, if I was to ask many of the entrepreneurs I've spoken to about what they would do differently, a lot of it is that same thing. It's about getting out and doing stuff and not being worried about what other people thought. Because often we stop ourselves, we don't seize the day because we're worried about what other people might think of us. And in some
mhm.
ways, you only have one chance. Just get on and do it is the key. So I love
Yeah.
that as a piece there. We're going to come to an end now. So how do people find you? I've got the details here, but tell us, how can people find the Chutzpah guy?
I do have a website. It's thechutzpahguy.com.
Yeah.
I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. And
Okay.
LinkedIn has more of actually my interviews, my
Yeah.
videos, and also a lot of my writing,
Yeah.
the articles or the occasional posts that I do where something comes to mind about chutzpah,
Yeah.
and those show up frequently.
And I
Uh,
would say,
I,
that's an area where I found lots of your videos and YouTubes and TV interviews are on there as well. So anyone who's listening to this, Go and check that out. There's some
Right.
good resource in there.
Right. And if people connect with me on LinkedIn and they want to speak, I'm always happy to have a conversation. I'll somehow find a way to fit in some time so we can learn from each other.
I love that. Yeah. So Mason, thank you very much. The Chutzpah guy. This has been a fascinating conversation. This is the third or fourth time we've talked, and I remember hearing you back in Dallas back in April, and this has put more meat onto the bones of the Chutzpah framework that you've created, and I love it. And there's some really powerful things here. So thank you very much.
Well,
I
Phil,
appreciate it, and I look forward to carry on these conversations in the future.
yeah, and I sincerely appreciate the opportunity. I hope we brought value. I'm sure we brought value to your audience, and hopefully they can use the takeaways in their lives and their businesses. And look forward to working with you again down the road.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you. And as I always say to the audience, at the end of the day, I can't hold them accountable to what they're doing, but actually you've got some key information here, which I think is some really powerful pieces. And I've taken loads of notes, as I always do when I'm doing these podcasts. We will create the show notes that go with it so people can read that and pick up more information. There'll be links to the books that we've talked about, links to your book, The Chutzpah Advantage, as well, so people can check into that as well, which they can buy on Amazon, because I've seen that there as well. So get out and check that out. And feel free to connect with the Chutzpah guy, Mason Harris. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again, Phil. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Be well, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you.